Welcome to the Cheating Secrets channel. Is infidelity a genetic disorder? My boss, Jim Wright, instructed me to take a short tour of the hotel so that I could see how extensive the modernization of the electrical equipment needed to be. Meanwhile, he was supposed to meet with the hotel owners in their office. I walked by the pool, trying my best not to let anyone notice that I was discreetly attempting to observe all the necklines I could. It was then that I noticed a red-haired woman in her early 40s, chatting with a man who was obviously a few years younger than her. They moved their lounge chairs closer to each other, and the man placed his hand on her left knee. His elbow kept brushing against the generously shaped left breast of the lady. I quickly hurried away from the pool, relaxing only when I was out of sight of the people lounging by the pool. I considered my options for a full 20 seconds. Instinctively, I knew what I needed to do, but I briefly contemplated the consequences, and I saw only one appropriate course of action. Taking out my mobile phone, I sent a brief message to my boss. Then, I cautiously made my way back to the pool, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. I stood in the shadow of the upper balcony, with my phone's camera display turned on. After slowly counting to 25, I began filming the couple I had noticed earlier. Now, the woman was lying in a lounge chair with her top unfastened, while the man was slowly applying sunscreen to her back, paying particular attention to the impressive area of her breast that was exposed and prominently on display. I had been recording for only a few seconds when an obviously enraged man rushed towards the couple. He grabbed a handful of the sunscreen applier's hair and ruthlessly yanked his head back, exposing the man's chin and throat. I clearly heard the thud as the furious man's fist met Romeo's throat. This was immediately followed by a second blow, this time to the man's chin. The man who had been tending to the sensuous redhead just moments before was now lying on the edge of the pool, making horrendous retching sounds. Everything happened so quickly that the woman barely had time to turn around and see the very angry man standing over her, rubbing his fist. This lasted only a few seconds before he grabbed her by her red locks. "Jim," was all she managed to shout before he pulled her to her feet by the hair on her head. I was still recording, so I captured her relaxed yet fairly firm breast as the man turned her to face him. "You filthy creature," was all he could muster, staring at his wife's panic-stricken face and then down at her exposed breast. For a moment, I feared he was going to hit her, but fortunately, he restrained his anger and simply shoved her back into the pool. He then hurled a few chairs and plastic tables across the deck before he noticed me standing off to the side. He visibly slumped, then awkwardly began moving in my direction. "Mike, take me to the damn truck before I end up in jail," was all he could muster as tears started streaming down his cheeks. I led Jim to the company truck parked in the lot. By this time, he had turned into a complete zombie, showing no emotion and staring straight ahead as I drove down the highway. The 2-hour drive home passed in eerie silence, except for the occasional guttural sounds escaping Jim's throat. I parked in the driveway and walked him to his house. Jim sat at the kitchen table while I took 2 beers out of the fridge. I placed one in front of him and opened the other for myself. Then, I sat down on the chair opposite him. His unwavering gaze made me more than a little uneasy. I stared into his eyes for a few seconds before asking, "Did we get the contract?" Jim blinked at my question before suddenly bursting into laughter. "You dumb bastard," was all he muttered as he opened the beer and took a big gulp. Maybe my question was stupid, but it snapped Jim out of his trance. "That lying cunt told me she was going to spend a few days with her mother at her parents' lakeside cabin. She left yesterday morning. She's probably been sleeping with that damn Harrison since yesterday. Damn it. I called her mom's cabin this morning and asked to speak to Kelly. Her mom said she was in the shower but would ask me to call back in a few minutes. Kelly called me back about 10 minutes later. If she was in the shower at her mother's lake house at 10 in the morning, there's no way she could have gotten to Timberbrook by the time you found her with that bastard, One Egg Harrison." Which suggests that her mother was covering for her, I reasoned. "It means her mother knew what the hell Kelly was up to and was covering for her," Jim echoed my words. "Damn it. She's been visiting her mother at that cottage every summer since we got married. Now I have to wonder how long this crap has been going on and whether one bald was the first or just one of many. Jim had an interesting point of view, and I was considering it from every possible angle as I drove home. It seemed possible, even likely, that Jim's wife was being aided and encouraged in her infidelity by her own mother. Could this be an inherited trait or just some weakness passed down through generations? When I pulled into the driveway, I saw my mother-in-law's car. I didn't want to listen to her nonsense, so I parked and went to the back door, knowing that my wife, Tracy, would be sitting at the kitchen table, drinking wine with her mother. As usual, I was right. The only thing I didn't expect was the volume of their conversation. To be honest, the intensity and content of their discussion were a bit shocking. "Jesus, Mom," Tracy practically yelled at her mother. "You know how much Daddy hates the one-egg man. What were you thinking?" I couldn't help but feel proud of Tracy's outrage at her mother's action. Tracy and I had vowed to remain faithful throughout our married life, and on this point we were definitely in agreement. "Please don't refer to Bentley as a one-egg. It came out accidentally. Besides, he's still capable of performing quite well," Kelly insisted. "It wasn't an accident," Tracy replied. "You were out in broad daylight with another man, not Daddy, and only 2 hours from home. I warned you to keep your guard up, but you did it anyway. I thought we were far enough away from home to be safe. I don't know why your father was there or how he found us by the pool. He never goes to hotels, let alone pools. Do you think he's cheating on me?" "No, I don't know," Tracy replied. "Dad adores you. He would never cheat, and I'm sure he had no idea you were cheating on him. That's why his reaction was so intense. He must have been shocked to see one-egg rubbing lotion on your large breasts." "Bentley was only rubbing lotion on the sides of my breasts," Kelly stated. "He was being a perfect gentleman." "I'm sure he was. Dad punched him in the throat and then broke his jaw for no reason at all. How are you going to handle this, Mom? It seems like Dad is really furious. I'd like to stay with you for a few days until your father calms down, if you don't mind. You know how much Jim adores me. He'll get over this little mistake." "Maybe, but only until he finds out about your other mistakes," Tracy suggested. "You know this wouldn't end well." Did Kelly make other mistakes, as Tracy called them? Did my wife know about them? She didn't seem too surprised that her mother was with one egg. This information was disturbing. Not wanting them to know I was in the house and had overheard their conversation, I quietly slipped out through the back door and walked around to the front. The mother and daughter fell silent as soon as the door opened. I nodded at the now silent duo, walked to the fridge, and grabbed a beer. It occurred to me that they had no idea how much I knew about the day's events and were waiting for me to reveal what I knew. But I simply turned and went upstairs to take a shower. They must have been curious about how much I knew, how I would react, what I would say, and whom I might tell. However, I decided to leave them guessing. The whole situation was incredibly uncomfortable, and Tracy's role in it was, to say the least, troubling. It struck me that Tracy obviously knew her mother was fooling around, but had never mentioned it to either her father or me. Keeping such a secret was the same as lying, as far as I could tell. I had just finished getting dressed when Tracy walked into the bedroom. "Mom and Dad had a bit of a disagreement today. Mom wants to stay with us for a few days until they sort out their differences. I told her it was okay. I hope you don't mind." What kind of husband would I be if I objected to my wife's mother staying for a few days? I asked rhetorically. "Your parents deserve special consideration. Look how kind your father has been to me. He's really a great guy." Tracy seemed to study my face, searching for any hints of my feelings. When I mentioned her father, she flinched slightly, but perhaps it was just my imagination. "That's one of the reasons I love you so much, Mike. You always treat me and my family like we're special," Tracy replied. "I've worked with your father for 5 years. I knew him before I met you, and he is special. He gave me my first real job. He's a good boss, a great father-in-law, and the best father a girl could ever have." For some reason, my praise of her father didn't seem to please Tracy as much as it should have. I had never noticed it before, but now it seemed that Tracy felt some guilt over her mother's extramarital escapades. Had I just been oblivious to it until now? Kelly spent half of dinner asking me questions about work. She wanted to know what projects we were working on, what bids we were making, and where I had been working that day. It was obvious that she was trying to figure out how much I knew and how Jim ended up at the same hotel where she had ordered the special dish with one egg the night before. I avoided any mention of the fact that Jim was asked to do an upgrade job at the Blood Hotel or my involvement in the incident at the swimming pool. I decided that my wife and her mother weren't the only ones who could have secrets. After dinner, I announced that I was going to mow the lawn. Since my suspicions were dominating my thoughts, I secretly left my phone in recording mode behind a banana on the kitchen table, far from the dishwasher. It was getting dark by the time I finished putting away the mower. Both women were watching Survivor on TV in the living room. I slipped the phone into my pocket and wished them good night before heading upstairs to the master bedroom. Later, I listened to the recorded conversation between my wife and her mother after I had left the house. To say it was eye-opening would be an understatement. The two women were conspiring on how to win Jim's forgiveness. They floated several ideas, but it mostly boiled down to Kelly having sex with Jim for as long as it took for him to fully forgive and trust his wayward wife again. My wife helpfully suggested that Kelly increase the number of pleasures she would offer Jim and occasionally allow him to take her from behind. Kelly wasn't thrilled with that option. Bentley insisted on having sex from behind, but with his size, it was not fun at all, she admitted. Jim had never shown much interest in it, and that suited me just fine. I'd let my lover do it only on special occasions, but the large size of the Bentley made me reconsider. Who would have thought that one egg was so well endowed? Tracy joked. Honestly, I had heard some rumors, Kelly confessed. Mom overheard Mary Chase telling Sue Land about Bentley's size, and she mentioned it to me. Did Grandma tell you that the one-egger was large in size? I'm surprised she didn't try him out when Grandpa went on one of his golf trips. You're avoiding eye contact. Don't tell me one egg slept with Grandma. She's around 62 or so, Tracy exclaimed in obvious astonishment. It was a couple of years ago, and I hope I look as good as Mom when I'm her age, Kelly remarked. By the way, just how big is he? Let's just say you won't be disappointed, Kelly replied as if she were recommending a good hairdresser. Just make sure I'm not the one rocking Bentley's little grandson on my knee. I've never cheated on Mike, and I certainly wouldn't start with one egg, Tracy declared. I want Mike to be the father of all our children. That's the one thing I'm sure of. I love that man. I love your father too. That's why this is all so complicated. I don't want a divorce, Kelly insisted. But he works such long hours and comes home so exhausted. We're lucky if we have sex a couple of times a week. That's why I needed Bentley. Really, Mom? And what about George Marsh, Jeff Stevens, and God knows who else? I don't like where this conversation is going. Let's go watch Survivor. I think they're going to vote off that Italian girl this week, Kelly said in an obvious attempt to change the subject. Work the next day was torturous. Jim was a complete mess as he handed out work assignments to start the day. There were 5 of us working at Wright Electric, and we exchanged glances while Jim stumbled through his instructions. As usual, Jim and I were working together on our current project, so he climbed into the passenger seat of the company truck. We were doing the wiring in a house under construction, so we could talk freely without worrying about being overheard. Once Jim started telling me about his situation, he kept talking all morning. I suppose it was cathartic for him, but it only made my mental state more confused. I found it difficult to reconcile what I had heard from my wife and her mother with the future I had envisioned for myself. Would Tracy eventually become a wandering wife like her mother and, apparently, her grandmother? Would I have enough influence in her life to keep her faithful? Was it worth the risk of an unhappy marriage or living life as a cuckold? I saved the conversation to a flash drive and lay down, knowing I would get very little sleep that night. I had a lot to think about. Kelly called me this morning, Jim began. She said she wanted to apologize if I got the impression that she was cheating on me with Bentley. She actually called that bastard Bentley. She said it was the only time she had ever cheated, or even come close to it. He had been pursuing her for months, and she finally gave in to his charm, and he scored a spectacular goal. I asked how long her mother had been covering for her, and she started stammering. It never occurred to her that it was obvious to me that her mother was lying about her whereabouts. We exchanged some harsh words, and I hung up. I wasn't sure if I should share with Jim the information I had gathered from eavesdropping. If he decided to reconcile, it would only make things worse. I decided to give him time to figure it out on his own, but I did so with determination. Jim, you need to take your time and figure out what's really going on. Maybe it was the first time, or maybe it wasn't. I suggest you think things through and weigh all the consequences of your decision, whether you decide to stay with Kelly or leave her behind. I'm sorry for you, Mike. You're married to my daughter and work with me, so you're caught in the middle of this mess. I feel like I've wasted 25 years of my life. If it weren't for Tracy, I'd say my married life was a meaningless charade. Having a wonderful daughter and a dependable son-in-law is the only saving grace. I still hadn't decided on my next course of action when I returned home that evening. As soon as I stepped into the kitchen, Tracy and her mother pounced on me from all sides. Dad told Mom that you were the one who told him she was at the pool with Bentley, Tracy said angrily. What kind of jerk tries to ruin his wife's parents' marriage? Really? And what do you think I should have done? I asked, more calmly than I actually felt. Kelly intervened. You could have told me that Jim was nearby and gotten the hell out of the pool. That would have been gentlemanly. I was afraid you would miss the pleasure of one egg massaging your chest in public. I was only thinking of you, although your bare chest was damn distracting, I countered. It's not my fault that you and your mother lied to Jim about you sleeping with some nutcase, that many have seen your chest, that Jim coldly beat up the cocky bastard, and that you're trying to feed a bunch of crap to one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Did you hear about how Grandma lied to Jim? Asked Tracy. It just keeps getting worse and worse. You have no idea how bad, I declared. You knew that your mother and grandmother were adulterers, yet you lied to help them maintain that status. Now you're all angry at me because your mother was so damn foolish as to let a complete scoundrel play with her chest in public as if it's my fault. I'm going to stick to my decision to be honest and straightforward with Jim, while you two try to justify the damn mess you've been pulling with your father and grandfather all these years. I could see the distress on Tracy's face as she pondered my words. I have never cheated on you, and I never would. I'm not like my mother and grandmother. I try to help them keep their filthy secrets, but I didn't like any of it. I constantly told them to stop their affairs and to be faithful to their husbands. Did you really say that? Kelly asked before Tracy could give her a deadly glare. Oh yes, she did, Kelly suddenly agreed. Grasping the predicament Tracy was in, she said she would never cheat on you and insisted that we and Mom start abiding by the rules of fidelity. I was wrong to let Bentley seduce me, but it will never happen again. I've learned my lesson. I swear it. Did George Marsh and Jeff Stevens have big sizes too, or were they just very convincing? I blabbed before I could hold my tongue. Tracy, did you tell Mike about George and Jeff? Did you turn away from me to save yourself? Kelly demanded an answer. How could Mike know about them if you didn't tell him? Oh no. Kelly then wailed. Did you tell Jim about George and Jeff? And what about Bill Simons? Does Jim know about him too? Not yet, I replied with a smile. The next day at work was interesting because of all the life-changing decisions. I told Jim everything I had overheard about what his wife and daughter had been discussing. He was as mad as hell, and then incredibly depressed. I see no choice, Mike. I'm going to contact a lawyer and get a divorce. Don't try to talk me out of it. I wouldn't even dream of it, I replied gloomily. I thought we could use the same lawyer and maybe get a better rate. But Tracy said she has never cheated on you, Jim objected. You have no reason to divorce Tracy. She loves you. I know that's true. I know Kelly loves you, and I wouldn't try to talk you out of a divorce. You're the one who helped me make the decision, Jim. If I didn't have your wisdom and experience, I might have been tempted to stay with Tracy. You told me that you, as it turned out, wasted 25 years being married to a fraud. I don't want to find myself in the same situation in 23 years. I no longer trust your daughter. I would spend every day worrying that she's looking for a bigger size. I damn well know that Tracy will insist on allowing Kelly and Kelly's mother to see our children and influence their lives. Leaving Tracy alone with my daughters would worry me, but letting your wife and her mother even talk to them scares me to death, I confessed. You understand why I can't continue on this path, don't you? For years later, I decided to take my wife Amber somewhere for our second anniversary. Our daughter Megan was 6 months old, and Amber's parents were more than happy to have her stay with them overnight. Since it was our anniversary, I splurged on a room at the Ritz, which was almost 100 miles away. I booked a table for dinner and eagerly looked forward to the opportunity to show my wife how much her love means to me. I requested a secluded table and was pleased when we were led to a rather dark corner of the room. After we ordered food and exchanged a few flirty jokes, Amber suddenly straightened up and stared at the entrance. "Isn't that your ex-wife?" she asked. I remember she was 2 years ahead of me in school and looked like a model. She's still beautiful. I heard she got remarried, but I've never seen her husband. He looks a bit older than her. Actually, he's the same age as Tracy, I replied, turning to see my ex-wife sitting at the other end of the room. Well, he must have had a hard life. He looks old enough to be her father, Amber noted. That's not her husband. That guy only has one ball, I replied with a sigh. For years ago, I made the right decision. Being with you now and seeing Tracy brings me relief and joy. What does her husband look like? Amber asked, her curiosity piqued. He looks exactly like a guy walking through the door with a baseball bat in his hand, I replied, mentally thanking my lucky stars. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode of Cheating Secrets. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.